Captain's log. Subdate 200403.1. Something has happened. I appear to have lost control of my vessel. I am currently working to fix the issue. Until then, I've had to turn my cameras upside down so as to limit the effect on content production. If this was you, Sith, expect consequences. Welcome everyone to the 13th Halls of Injustice. Today we have a somewhat peculiar subject, and I'll explain why later. Before we get into that though, what do you think of the new outfit? Christina Prime did a fantastic job updating it. Link to her channel, as always, down below. There is a new video, by the way, on Moisky Reads coming out tonight at 8 PM. A new video on Moisky Live, and I'll be streaming there tonight at 9:30 PM GMT. Links to all of that in the description down below. Today I'd like to talk about Grace Milani, spelt Millane. Grace was a university student who, upon completing her degree at the University of Lincoln, decided to take a year out and go travelling or backpacking, as is customary for many people who can still afford to. Her travels led her to Auckland, New Zealand. Tragically, the night before her 22nd birthday, she passed away. Grace had met a man through Tinder, and after meeting this man and sharing several drinks with this gentleman, they went back to his hotel in City Life. Prosecutors alleged that what happened next was that the defendant had choked Grace, and then went on to dump her body. The parts of this that make it somewhat interesting are the fact that the forensics did tell the jurors, even though her parents say this is not what happened, that the injuries were consistent with consensual acts due to the lack of struggle. Now, the reason for the choking is that, according to court statements from her friends, Grace had expressed an interest in exploring and experimenting with BDSM, and she did, like her friends, have profiles on BDSM dating apps, which would certainly lend credence to the forensics evidence. The defense alleged that her only injuries occurred during intercourse, and that everything was consensual, and that if you couple that with the inebriation, it was a key factor in Grace's passing. As I haven't overlooked it, let's perhaps address the fact that the defendant did admit to, upon awakening and realizing to his horror that Grace was no longer alive, he did put her body into a rather large suitcase and take her body out to the Waitakere Ranges to then be buried there. That, for those who don't know, is a rather large mountain area behind Auckland, telling the police that he did in fact just freak out, and that is somehow justification for making himself look even more guilty than he already is. To go back slightly, I'd like to read what Ron Mansfield, the defendant's lawyer, told the jury. If the couple engaged in consensual sexual activity and that went wrong, and no one intended for it to go wrong, then that is not murder. And that is what the defendant has said took place. And that is what, at the end, you will be told the evidence reveals. And that while the death from consensual choking was rare, it was dangerous if two people were inebriated, relatively inexperienced, and don't know each other too well. With Mr. Mansfield adding that he was not seeking to attach any blame or shame to Miss Milani for any sexual interests she may have had. Which is true. They're not trying to assign blame, but only point out that this was between two people, and that the evidence did in fact show they were engaging in BDSM while incredibly drunk. But the dumping of the body part, yeah, that does no one any favours, least of all the defendant. So what has happened? What is the verdict? The man has been convicted of murder. The sentence for this is life in prison. It took the jury of 7 women and 5 men 5 hours to unanimously agree that the accused murdered Grace in his hotel room after the pair met on a date in Auckland's CBD, with the now convicted having to serve 17 years before he is eligible for parole. Understandably, the defendant is going to appeal this, with Rachel Reed, a criminal lawyer based in Auckland, confirming she will appeal against both the conviction and the sentence. In delivering the sentence, Justice Simon Moore said the crimes had shocked New Zealand, and that the killer showed no remorse. Quoted as saying, "Manual strangulation is a particularly intimate form of violence, cold-blooded. Your actions reveal a complete disregard for your victim. You didn't ring an ambulance or call the police. Instead, you embarked on a well-planned and sustained coordinated course of action to conceal any evidence of what had occurred in your room. During the sentencing hearing, Grace's mother read out a victim impact statement via video link, describing the destruction that the unnamed defendant wrought upon her family. The tears I shed are never ending at the thought of never having the chance to be able to kiss my darling Grace goodbye. Grace was never just a daughter, she was my friend, my very best friend. I torment myself over what you did to my Grace, the terror and pain she must have experienced at your hands. As a mother, I would have done anything to change places with her. I should have been there, but she died terrified and alone in a room with you. Until more comes out with regards to the appeal process, we're in a bit of a limbo state, but there's something I haven't mentioned, isn't there? Something that's quite peculiar. Usually when sentences take place, we have a name and a face, don't we? But not now. No, we don't, and I admit I was a tad confused at first. In fact, it was also reported by Cosmopolitan that we won't be able to know the person's name until 2021. So why is he unnamed? In the UK, the press are permitted to name criminal suspects under investigation, something which for the most part with a number of crimes I disagree with, unless they are minors or a court specifically forbids it. However, New Zealand has stricter name suppression laws, which go as far back as the 1920s. These laws were originally intended to protect first-time young offenders to spare them from public shame, so they could go on to get jobs after they had fulfilled their punishment. The law has not evolved since then, which means that we and other outlets, myself included, I said we because Cosmo I'm reading this from, are unable to name the murderer, and pretty much any defendant is entitled to apply for anonymity. The reason why they get to stay anonymous for such a long stretch is because that the suppression of a defendant's identity usually lasts for 2 years in case any other related legal cases must be investigated, or if the defendant wants to appeal the verdict. Something which actually I think is a really good idea. It's a very clever idea. I've always held the position that you're convicted, it's done, but actually no. You have a right to appeal this. So even though this is an antiquated law, it's actually one I can get behind. I think we'd all like to know the name of the person involved, but I'd like to know that the process has been exhausted before I put them in an ISO cube for the remainder of their life. Because, by the way, if the appeal fails, that's where you're going. ISO cube for life. No parole. There has been a change in favour of transparency and open justice, but in high-profile cases like this, New Zealand courts still prefer anonymity for defendants to ensure they get a fair trial, which sounds a bit odd, considering the shooter thing. Now granted, you don't really do anonymity there, but perhaps that should have been a bit closed off so everyone didn't know about it. Perhaps I'm a little wrong on that. If I am, by all means do tell me in the comments down below. With this case, I'm very much interested to know what you think. So please do let me know in the comments down below. I also would like to know what you think of the update. If I don't see you over on Moisky Reads for a very short premiere, a bit of poetry, or on Moisky Live for a political recap with Trups LP, I hope you have a fantastic, I've lost count, quarantine, and thank you all for listening.
Oh, hi Jippo. What have you got there? You brought me a gift? So What does this button do?
Achoo!
Wait, what? It controls Meg's shuttle pod? Why, thank you, Jippo. How kind of you. Now let's have some fun.